before about 7 years ago. An interview appeared on a YouTube channel called VladTV. It sparked a surprising debate across the internet. During that interview, a rapper known as Kid Buu claimed something extraordinary. He insisted that he himself was a human clone.
I was cloned by Clonaid in Canada. My model number is 0112568, if anyone wants to see the registration in Clonaid.
According to his story, he was part of a second generation of cloned individuals created inside a secret facility. At the time, many people dismissed the claim as nothing more than a publicity stunt. Later explanations suggested the same thing, that the story may have been part of a marketing strategy designed to attract attention in the highly competitive world of hip-hop. But here is where things begin to get interesting.
We have 3 scientists working almost full-time in a lab.
The idea of human cloning was not entirely hidden from public discussion. Years before that interview, a controversial organization known as Clonaid announced something remarkable. They claimed that in 2002, they had successfully created the first human clone. A baby girl, they said, named Eve. This claim was never independently verified by the scientific community. But once the statement entered the public record, the question became difficult to ignore. Was Kid Buu simply creating a story for attention, or was he referencing a topic that had already appeared in public claims before? Because when you begin looking back at interviews like that one, the line between publicity, speculation, and something much deeper begins to blur. And that is exactly where today's investigation begins to intersect with one of the strangest historical mysteries of all: the Cabbage Patch Baby theory.
Welcome back to the Alias Gray channel. This video serves as a continuation of the last 2 videos. Make sure you have watched both in sequence so the full picture becomes clear. The first was about the Cabbage Patch Baby postcards, featured in the book The Babylon Postcards, along with the postcard imagery of cabbage fields. The second was about the first film, La Fée aux Choux, from 1896. What we are about to discuss is not a new idea, but it is interesting to revisit this concept now, especially as the number of discoveries continues to grow and the range of information becomes wider. So when we look more closely at what these postcards are really pointing to, they seem to refer to some kind of relatively recent seeding process or cloning process. In that sense, the cabbage is nothing more than a symbol of rebirth, a symbol of the female reproductive organs, a symbol connected to the resemblance between a cabbage and the shape of a baby's head, and a symbol tied to the idea that human beings were produced in massive quantities. In other words, this points to some kind of operation involving baby factories where children were produced on a large scale for a specific purpose, and as many have already suggested, there even appears to be a eugenics component to all of this, in which certain phenotypes were selected depending on the intended goal. With the films of Alice Guy, we learn that the origins of cinema are not only shrouded in mystery, but that these earliest works felt like rituals or acts of worship, using deep symbolism to induce a specific state of awareness. This strange old film was made to promote baby incubators at the 1896 Paris World's Fair, so this entire process must connect somehow to those incubators. We also have a reference from that exact same period, which we'll examine later, revealing where they sourced these premature infants. And further on in the video, we'll discuss another film that deals with ideas strikingly similar to this subject. But before we get there, is there any ancient reference to some kind of resettlement factories? We've touched on this before, but now's the perfect time to go deeper into the ancient symbol of Artemis, or Diana of Ephesus. Diana is the Latin name, Artemis the Greek. She was fundamentally the great mother goddess of fertility. In classical myth, Artemis is the virgin huntress, goddess of forests, wild animals. But the strange thing, in Ephesus, Asia Minor, there was massive Eastern influence, blending with the Greek, creating something entirely new. The people of Ephesus believed Artemis and Apollo were born in a sacred grove called Ortygia. Ortygia, strikingly close to the ancient Greek name for Ireland, Ogygia. the primeval forested land, said in many old religious texts to be the first resettlement center after the flood. So the Ephesians believed their own gods, the ones they devoted their entire lives to worshiping, were themselves born in an ancient grove. And not only that, they placed even heavier emphasis on fertility symbolism. They depicted their goddess with multiple breasts or egg-like forms, while her legs pressed tightly together.
In Strabo's geography, he states that on the same coast, sciable to the sea, is also Ortygia, which is a magnificent grove of all kinds of trees, of the cypress most of all. It is traversed by the Cenchrus River, where Leto is said to have bathed herself after her travail. For here is the mythical scene of the birth, and of the nurse Ortygia, and of the holy place where the birth took place, and of the olive tree nearby, where the goddess is said first to have taken her rest after she was relieved from her travail. Above the grove lies Mount Psominsis, where it is said that curates stationed themselves, and with the din of their arms frightened Hera out of her wits when she was jealously spying on Leto, and when they helped Leto to conceal from Hera the birth of her children. There are several temples in the place, some ancient and others built in later times, and in the ancient temples are many ancient wooden images. But in those of later times, there are the works of Scopas, for example, Leto holding a scepter, and Ortygia standing beside her, with a child in each arm. A general festival is held there annually, and by a certain custom they use the Veia to honor, particularly in the splendor of their banquets there. At that time also, a special college of the curates holds symposiums and performs certain mystic sacrifices. Her temple in ancient Ephesus, a Greek port city. This temple, one of the 7 wonders of the world, described as the largest building in all of antiquity. It was not just a religious center, it was the heart of ritual worship, shrouded in mystery, sacrifices offered to this multi-breasted goddess, symbol of divine fertility. But the temple was more than sacred ground. It was an economic fortress, essentially a bank. No one dared rob a holy place. It was believed to be the greatest bank of its era. The temple was rebuilt, again and again, across centuries, destroyed by invaders, including Christians who razed it to erase every trace of paganism. These seeding operations were never confined to one site, yet countless myths circle back to the great mother goddess and her children, because so many of these dates were veiled in legend. In Plato's greatest work, Timaeus, he reveals the secret of cycles and resets of advanced civilizations, and that there was not just one flood, but many. In the first place, you remember a single deluge only, but there were many previous ones. In the next place, you do not know that there formerly dwelt in your land the fairest and noblest race of men which ever lived, and that you and your whole city are descended from a small seed or remnant of them which survived. Now, at first it may seem as just a literary device, but the term seed is used again in Timaeus. Quote, Solomon marveled at his words and earnestly requested the priest to inform him exactly in order about these former citizens. You are welcome to hear about them, Solon, said the priest, both for your own sake and for that of your city, and above all, for the sake of the goddess, who is the common patron and parent and educator of both our cities. She founded your city 1,000 years before ours, receiving from the earth and Hephaestus the seed of your race, and afterwards she founded ours. Later in Timaeus, it turns deeply alchemical, describing the creation of man with the exact same terminology. Quote, the bones and flesh and other similar parts of us were made as follows. The first principle of all of them was the generation of the marrow, of the bonds of life, which unite the soul, which the body are made fast there, and they are the root and foundation of the human race. The marrow itself is created out of other materials. God took such of the primary triangles as were straight and smooth and were adapted by perfection to produce fire and water and air and earth. These, I say, he separated from their kinds, and mingling them in due proportions with one another, made the marrow out of them, to be a universal seed of the whole race of mankind. And in this seed he then planted and enclosed the souls, and in the original distribution gave to the marrow as many and various forms as the different kinds of souls were hereafter to receive. That which, like a field, was to receive the divine seed, he made round every way, and called that portion of the marrow brain, intending that when an animal was perfected, the vessel containing the substance should be the head. But that which was intended to contain the remaining immortal part of the soul, he distributed into figures at once around and elongated, and he called them all by name, marrow. And to these, as to anchors fastening the bonds of the whole soul, he proceeded to fashion around them the entire framework of our body, constructing for the marrow, first of all, a complete covering of bone. Timaeus continues, describing in detail how the gods created us, and uses a garden as a reference, which is very strange. There is a movie called Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It carries the same chilling idea. Humans created from the garden, copied, cloned, duplicated. It connects directly to what we are uncovering in this video. We have a complete series on the channel dissecting this film, its symbols, and how closely they echo the creation process described in Timaeus. Watch it. See the link for yourself. At first, you think he's just talking about God and the soul. Then he says, quote, "But our creators, considering whether they should make a longer-lived race, which was worse, or a shorter-lived race, which was better, came to the conclusion that everyone ought to prefer a shorter span of life, which was better, to a longer one, which was worse. And therefore they covered the head with thin bone, but not with flesh and sinews, since it had no joints, and thus the head was added, having more wisdom and sensation than the rest of the body, but also, being in every man, far weaker. For these reasons, and after this manner, God placed the sinews at the extremity of the head, in a circle around the neck, and glued them together by the principle of likeness, and fastened the extremities of the jawbones to them below the face. And the other sinews he dispersed throughout the body, fastening limb to limb. The framers of us framed the mouth, as now arranged, having teeth and tongue and lips, with a view to the necessary and the good, contriving the way in for necessary purposes, the way out for the best purposes. For that is necessary, which enters in and gives food to the body. But the river of speech, which flows out of man and ministers to the intelligence, is the fairest and noblest of all streams. Still, the head could neither be left a bare frame of bones on account of the extremes of heat and cold in the different seasons, nor yet be allowed to be wholly covered and become so dull and senseless by reason of the overgrowth of flesh. The fleshy nature was not, therefore, wholly dried up, but a large sort of peel was parted off and remained over, which is now called the skin. This met and grew by the help of the cerebral moisture and became the circular enveloping of the head. For our creators well knew that women and other animals would someday be framed out of men, and they further knew that many animals would require the use of nails for many purposes, wherefore they fashioned in men at their first creation the rudiments of nails. Where this purpose and for these reasons they caused skin, hair, and nails to grow at the extremities of the limbs. And now that all the parts and members of the mortal animal had come together, since its life of necessity consisted of fire and breath and bright, it therefore wasted away by dissolution and depletion. The gods contrived the following remedy, and mingled in nature. It can set up a man with other forms and perceptions, and thus created another kind of animal. These are the trees and plants and seeds, which have been improved by cultivation and are now domesticated among us. Anciently, they were only the wild kinds, which are older than the cultivated. For everything that partakes of life may be truly called a living being, and the animal of which we are now speaking partakes of the third kind of soul, which is said to be seated between the midriff and the navel, having no part in opinion or reason or mind, but only in feelings of pleasure and pain and the desires which accompany them. For this nature is always in a passive state, revolving in and about itself, repelling the motion from without and using its own, and accordingly is not endowed by nature with the power of observing or reflecting on its own concerns. Wherefore, it lives, does not differ from a living being, but it is fixed and rooted in the same spot, having no power of self-motion. Now after the superior powers had created all these natures to be food for us, who are of the inferior nature, they cut various channels through the body as through a garden, that it may be watered as from a running stream. There's more to cover, but to keep moving, he's basically describing how our creators took one of our original forms and transformed it into something more material, tied to primal senses, stripped of self-will, to make them less like gods. A very strange process, flesh binding to bones. But it's no mere spiritual explanation of body formation. It reads like a manual. Decisions had to be made. The creators chose lifespan, shorter for these beings, while the original seed had far longer lives. In the end, he reveals the seed is a womb. He clearly separates God, who created the soul, from the gods who shaped and manipulated the physical bodies. This is the final paragraph, the closing of Timaeus, and it's crucial. Quote, "Thus our original design of discoursing with the universe down to the creation of man is nearly complete. A brief mention may be made of the generation of other animals, so far as the subject admits of brevity. In this manner, our argument will best attain a due proportion. On the subject of animals, then the following remarks may be offered. Of the men who came into the world, those who were cowards or led unrighteous lives may with reason be supposed to have changed into the nature of women in the second generation." Hold up. What is he talking about? We'll come back to this, but he's speaking of a great race of humans that were once androgynous. This is an ancient, esoteric secret, referenced by many Greek philosophers, multiple times. He's saying these original humans turned into women due to their natures, meaning these androgynous beings did not reproduce, and it seems they did not eat or drink at all. The original gods. And he continues, quote, "And this was the reason why, at the time the gods created us, in the desire of sexual intercourse, contriving in man one animated substance, and in the woman another, which they formed respectively in the following manner." There you go. These gods, just remember, not the same as God, gave us sexual intercourse by design to make us more like animals. Quote, "The outlet for drink, by which liquids pass through the lung, under the kidneys, and into the bladder, which receives them by the pressure of the air amidst them, was so fashioned by them as to penetrate also into the body of the marrow, which passes from the head along the neck and through the back, and which in the preceding discourse we have named the seed. And the seed, having life and becoming endowed with respiration, produces in that part in which it respires a lively desire of emission, and thus creates in us the love of procreation. Wherefore, also in men, the organ of generation becoming rebellious and masterful, like an animal disobedient to reason and maddened with the sting of lust, seeks to gain absolute sway. And the same is the case with the so-called womb, or matrix of women, the animal within them, as desirous to procreate children, and remaining unfruitful long beyond its proper time, gets discontented and angry, and wandering in every direction through the body, closes up the passages of the breath, and by obstructing respiration, drives them to extremity, causing all varieties of diseases, until at length the desire and love of the man and the woman, bringing them together, as it were plucking the fruit from a tree, so in the womb, as in a field, animals unseen by reason of their smallness and without form, these again are separated and matured within. They are then finally brought out into the light, and thus the generation of animals is completed. Thus were created women and female sex in general. Plato is extremely secretive throughout this entire book. It seems the knowledge of the science and the art of cloning and creating hybrid beings was a highly guarded, esoteric secret. This also connects to the mysterious nature of alchemy, a topic that will need its own dedicated video, because it directly relates to the creation of artificial humans. These were the greatest secrets of the ancient world. Every author in the occult sciences alludes to this very subject, which is exactly why the need for the Philosopher's Stone arose, to decode it. And although it is also portrayed as a legendary substance capable of turning ordinary metals into gold, the symbols run far deeper than that. But that will be the topic of the next video.